The first time my billionaire grandfather saw me again, I was standing in a line for donated blankets. He was there as the smiling founder on the banner. I was there as one of the at-risk young adults his foundation was supposed to save. My name is Ava Hart. I was 21 years old, technically homeless, wearing the same thrift store hoodie for the third day in a row when my grandfather, Arthur Kensington, the man worth more money than I could count, walked into the charity camp he funded and recognized me. He thought I was away at an elite university, living my dream using the $3 million trust he'd created for my future. But by the time we sat across from each other in the cramped office behind the camp's cafeteria, and he asked, "Ava, what happened?" That trust was gone. Emptied. Signed away. Not lost to bad investments. Not mine. Anyway, stolen by the two people who were supposed to protect it most. My parents. Charity camp. They called it a transitional living program. On paper, it sounded hopeful. 3 months at a rural retreat center outside the city, with counseling, job training, and a chance to get back on your feet if you'd slipped between the cracks. Most of us in cabin 4 just called it charity camp. We'd come from shelters, from abusive houses, from couches and cars, and anywhere that wasn't really home. I'd arrived 3 weeks earlier, with everything I owned crammed into one backpack. On intake forms, under reason for referral, the social worker had written financial abuse/family estrangement. At night, when I lay awake on the thin mattress listening to strangers breathing in the bunks around me, I kept turning those words over. Estranged, abused. They felt too heavy, too dramatic. Then I'd remember the voicemail from my mother, saying I was ungrateful, unstable, and that I'd blown my chance with the trust and the emptiness in my bank account, and the fact I was sleeping in a camp bed funded by my grandfather's foundation instead of in a dorm I'd once pinned on my vision board, and dramatic didn't seem strong enough. That morning, the staff had announced a special visit. "Mr. Kensington is coming today. Maria, the program director, said as we ate powdered eggs in the cafeteria. Please be respectful. He's the one who makes all this possible." Some of the other residents shrugged. To them, he was just another rich donor in a suit whose name was on the building. To me, he was the ghost of a life I used to almost have. On the drive to camp, the caseworker had pointed at the big sign by the front gate, Kensington Foundation Center for Renewal. "Any relation?" she'd asked, half joking. "Yeah," I'd said without thinking. "He's my grandfather." Her eyes had widened. "What?" she blurted. "Are you serious?" I nodded. She'd glanced from the sign to my cheap backpack and back again. "What are you doing here, then?" she'd asked, not unkindly. "Trying to figure that out." I'd said I hadn't planned on seeing him. Grandpa Arthur lived in another world, one of glass penthouses and private jets and black tie galas, where I'd been paraded around as a cute accessory when I was younger. My parents had cut me off from him before I turned 18. "Your grandfather's money comes with strings," my mother, Lila, had said. "We don't need his judgment. We can take care of you ourselves." They'd fought with him about control of my trust when I was 16. After that, visits stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. When he did send cards, they disappeared into some invisible drawer before they reached my room. I'd stopped expecting him to be part of my life. Standing in line for the special visit that day, I kept my head down. We were in the main hall, a big lodge with exposed beams and motivational posters peeling off the walls. Staff had told us to look engaged. Some of the campers smoothed their hair. Some checked their reflection in their phone cameras. I pulled my hoodie sleeves over the scars on my forearms and stared at the floorboards. The doors opened. "Mr. Kensington, welcome." Maria gushed. I glanced up just once. He looked older than I remembered. The last time I'd seen him, I was 15. He'd taken me to a museum, pointed at a painting, and said, Sometimes truth gets trapped under layers of varnish. Doesn't mean it's not still there. Now, in the doorway, he was in his 70s, still tall, still impeccably dressed in a navy suit and cashmere coat, silver hair swept back. He looked around the room like a man surveying a project, not like someone expecting to find his granddaughter. Then his gaze landed on me. He blinked, took a step forward. "Ava," he said, voice cracking. Every head turned. Heat rushed to my face. I wished the floor would swallow me. I managed a weak smile. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, to the trust girl. To understand why that moment felt so surreal, you need to know who I was supposed to be. The story everyone knew went something like this. Arthur Kensington, self-made billionaire and tech pioneer, had one daughter, Lila. Lila married a charming corporate lawyer named Daniel Hart. Together, they had one child, Ava, me, the golden granddaughter. When I was 10, Forbes ran a profile on my grandfather titled The Kensington Legacy. They took a photo of the two of us standing in front of his townhouse in New York. I wore a red coat he'd bought me, double-breasted, too grown up for my age. They called me the future of the family. Grandpa had created a trust for me when I was a baby, $3 million, funded with stock that multiplied like rabbits over time. The terms were simple. I would get access to the funds for education and reasonable startup capital once I turned 18, with more flexibility after 25, provided I met certain conditions like staying out of serious legal trouble. He wanted me to have options. "Your parents grew up with my shadow over them," he told me once when we visited his lake house. "I don't want that for you. I want you to have light and a parachute, even if you never need it." When I was 13, he took me to a bank office and introduced me to a severe woman in a gray suit named Ms. Patel, who he said would be my trustee. "She'll make sure no one touches this without your consent when the time comes," he'd said. My parents never liked that. They liked it less when I got into a prestigious arts high school on scholarship, and he offered to cover the rest of the tuition. "We can afford it," my dad had said through gritted teeth. "We don't need your money." Grandpa had raised an eyebrow. "Good," he'd said. "Then consider this early access to hers." Their fight that night was loud enough that even with my door closed and headphones on, I heard my name more than once. After that, visits to Grandpa's world became fewer. Excuses multiplied. Grandpa's busy with the company. Travel isn't good for his heart. He doesn't want to be bothered. I believed them for a while. Then, when I was 15, I borrowed my mother's phone to call a friend and saw an unread text from Grandpa. "Miss you. Can we schedule a weekend? Love, G." Sent 6 weeks earlier. Deleted, presumably. I confronted her. "You went through my private messages," she'd snapped, deflecting. "You went through mine first." I'd shot back. "When you opened my acceptance email." That got me grounded. The grounding extended indefinitely after I wrote Grandpa a letter explaining what had been happening. He called the house. They didn't let me talk to him. After that, the silence between their side of the family and his turned into a canyon. They told me he'd chosen the company over us. He might have believed the same about them. By the time my 18th birthday loomed, my trust felt more like a myth than a reality. Dad sat me down at the kitchen table 3 weeks before. "You know, Ava," he said, "your grandfather did set aside some things for you. But with the market and taxes and everything, it's not what people think. We need to be responsible." Mom chimed in. "We've been managing your accounts all these years," she said, "paying your school fees, your activities. It's all part of the same pool. When you turn 18, there won't be a magic vault you can dive into." That's not what he told me. I'd said, "Your grandfather lives in a fantasy world," Dad had said. "He thinks money grows back after every mistake. Out here, it doesn't." They talked about practicalities. Rent, bills. How hard it was for regular people like us, people who weren't billionaires, to keep up. They didn't say, "We've burned through your trust like it was ours." But they didn't have to. The night before my birthday, I logged into the online portal Ms. Patel had helped me set up when I was 16. The balance used to show 8 figures, accounting for growth and market swings. Now, it showed $47,832.11, cropped, small, and next to it, a note. Additional distributions made per co-trustee request. Please contact your trustee for details. My heart thudded. I called Ms. Patel the next morning. "It's complicated, Ava," she'd said, voice tight. "Your parents petitioned the court to be added as co-trustees when you were still a minor, claiming your grandfather was no longer competent to manage the trust. There was a guardianship case. I opposed it. The judge sided with them in part. Nobody told me," I'd said. "You were 17, she replied. "They argued disclosure would upset you. They promised the funds would still be used primarily for your benefit." "And were they?" I asked. She was silent. Then, "There are records you have the right to see once you're formally an adult," she said. "I suggest you request them. In writing." I did. She emailed me statements, transfers, fees, loans to my parents' holding company, payments for family expenses. The $3 million parachute had become a family slush fund. Nobody had asked me. When I confronted them, they didn't deny it. "You live here, don't you?" Dad had shouted. "You ate those groceries, used that car, went to that school. Where do you think all that came from?" "The trust," I'd said, "that you were supposed to be stewarding, not strip mining." Mom had hissed, "How dare you speak to us like we're thieves? We kept you alive. Your grandfather threw money around like confetti. We used what we had to, for the family. For your lifestyle," I'd said. That fight ended with an ultimatum. "If you think you can do better," Dad had said, tossing a thin folder of what remained toward me, "then go. Move out. Support yourself. See how far your precious 47 grand gets you in the real world." So I went. I moved into a shared apartment near campus. I got 2 part-time jobs. I tried to stretch the remaining funds over 4 years. I made it through one before the money and my mental health both ran out. When the landlord raised rent, my roommates chose their partners over our lease. I bounced between couches, then into a shelter, then into charity camp. 3 years after turning 18, I was standing in that lodge somewhere outside town, in a line for donated blankets, when my grandfather walked in and saw me. To him, I should have been in a library at some good university, trust funds quietly accruing while I majored in something impractical and beautiful. Instead, I was wrapped in a charity issue fleece, holding a paper cup of watered-down coffee. 3. "Ava, what happened?" For a few seconds after he said my name, no one moved. The other campers glanced between us, curiosity crackling. Staff shifted nervously, not sure what was happening. "Ava," he repeated, taking off his glasses, as if the lenses were to blame. I swallowed. "Hi, Grandpa," I said again. He crossed the room in 6 long strides. Up close, I could see the lines deepening around his eyes, the tremor in his hand. "You look," he began, then seemed to catch himself. "Are you all right? Why are you here?" Maria, the program director, hurried over. "Mr. Kensington," she said, voice pitched a little too high. "You know, Ava, she's my granddaughter," he said flatly. Her eyes flew wide. "Oh," she said, I wasn't aware. Ava came through the city intake. We had no idea." "It's okay." I cut in because the last thing I needed was for her to start apologizing for treating me like a regular client instead of a VIP. Grandpa looked at me, really looked, at the dark circles under my eyes, at the frayed cuffs of my hoodie, at the camp badge clipped to my shirt. AVA, cabin 4. Is there somewhere we can talk? He asked Maria, without taking his eyes off me. She nodded quickly. Of course, she said. My office. He gestured for me to go ahead. In the small office behind the cafeteria, he closed the door gently and turned to face me. For the first time since I was a kid, I saw him look completely unscripted. No practiced warmth for cameras. No cool detachment for boardrooms. Just a grandfather whose world had tilted. Ava, he said softly. What happened? I laughed. A short, brittle sound. Do you want the 5-minute version? I asked. Or the novel? His mouth twitched at that, a ghost of our old humor. Give me the truth, he said. All of it. I can handle a long story. So I told him. Not everything. Some wounds were still too raw. But I told him about the co-trustee petition, about the transfers, about the family expenses, about my parents' ultimatum, about the remaining $47,000 and how fast it went when you were trying to pay for rent, books, and groceries without a safety net. He listened, did not interrupt. When I finished, his hands were clenched on the back of the chair, so tightly his knuckles were white. I appointed Ms. Patel specifically to keep this from happening. He said, more to himself than to me. I gave very clear instructions about distributions. I explicitly refused to add Daniel and Lila as trustees. When they asked, how? They went around you, I said. They argued you were losing capacity, that the stress of the company had gotten to you, that you were making impulsive decisions that would hurt me long term. His eyes flashed. And the judge believed them? He demanded. I wasn't in the courtroom. I said, I only saw the orders later. But yeah, to a point. Enough to give them access. Hot shame flooded his face. I tried to do the right thing, he said quietly, to protect you from exactly the kind of siphoning your parents did with your college fund when you were a baby. I thought locking it up in a trust with an independent trustee would be enough. It was, I said, for a while. He sank into the chair. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, looking up at me. Why didn't you call? I swallowed. I tried. I said, after that first statement, Mom changed her number. Dad blocked my emails. They told everyone you were the one who'd cut us off. And you didn't call either. He winced. I did, he said. Or I tried. Your mother answered. She said you didn't want to speak to me, that you were embarrassed about dropping out of school, that you told her to tell me to stop interfering. My heart lurched. That's not true, I said. I never said that. I thought, maybe you needed space, he said quietly, that you were angry at me for not doing more when your parents started pushing back about the trust. I told myself you'd come when you were ready. In the meantime, I threw more money at the world, hoping some of it would help someone. He shook his head, bitter. Apparently, I couldn't even protect the one person I actually built that damn fortune for. He muttered. Guilt pricked me. None of this was his fault. But grief looks for someone to blame. Sometimes it picks the nearest mirror. I reached across the desk and put my hand over his. You did what you could, I said. You gave me the parachute. They cut it open when I wasn't looking. His jaw tightened. Then it's time we stopped letting them fall on you for cushioning, he said. He sat up straighter. Where are you staying? He asked. Cabin 4, I said. Bunk 3. He flinched. Not anymore, he said. Pack your things. You're coming with me. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm not ready to step back into that world. I'm not ready to be your press problem. This isn't about press, Ava, he said sharply. It's about you sleeping in a room with 12 strangers while my daughter spends what's left of your trust on spa weekends. Anger flickered in me again. Dragging me back to your penthouse doesn't fix what they did, I said. If anything, it makes it easier for them to tell themselves a story where I'm the villain. She ran to Grandpa and turned him against us. He opened his mouth, then closed it. What do you suggest? He asked, surprising me. I took a breath. There's one thing that might fix some of it, I said, or at least make it fairer. Name it, he said. I want to see everything, I said. All the trust records, court filings, petitions. Everything Ms. Patel has. Everything their lawyers filed. I want to know exactly how they did it. He nodded slowly. And then, he asked. And then, I said, I want to decide with you, and with a good lawyer, how to respond. Not as a disowned, broke, 21-year-old begging for scraps. As the beneficiary you always meant me to be. A spark returned to his eyes. That, he said, sounds like a plan. 4. The paper trail. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room 20 floors up in the Kensington Tower, a glass skyscraper downtown I'd last visited as a teenager, wearing borrowed heels and being told to smile for the donors. Now I wore jeans and a clean hoodie, hair in a low ponytail, feeling both out of place and more grounded than I ever had in that building. On the table in front of me lay 4 thick binders. Trust documents, Ava Hart, court filings, Hart versus Kensington guardianship, distributions and transfers, internal notes, Kensington family office. Grandpa sat beside me. Ms. Patel sat across. Next to her was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a blazer sharp enough to cut glass. Monica Alvarez, a trust and estates litigator with a reputation, Grandpa said, for eating fraudulent guardianships for breakfast. What your parents did isn't rare, Monica said, flipping a page. It's just usually done in quieter families without the resources to fight back. Wealthy grandparents create trusts. Parents feel threatened or resentful. They find a friendly judge and argue elder incapacity. The beneficiary, in this case, you, becomes a pawn. Weapons, I corrected softly. She met my eyes. We can turn you back into a person, she said, but it won't be pretty. I opened the first binder. The original trust document was there, dated the week after I was born. Grandpa's signature. A very clear statement. The purpose of this trust is to provide for the education and initial adult endeavors of my granddaughter, Ava, independent of her parents' financial situation or choices. Independent. Then there were amendments. One from when I was 12, modestly increasing the principal. Another from when I was 16, clarifying that distributions for family living expenses required my express consent after age 18. Then the court petition from my parents. They'd filed when I was 17 and a half. In it, they claimed, Grandpa was increasingly forgetful. He'd made impulsive financial decisions that jeopardized the trust. He'd attempted to direct large lump sum withdrawals to Ava, who lacked the maturity to manage them. None of that was true. Yes, Grandpa had once tried to prepay my entire high school tuition directly when he got frustrated with the school's billing office. But forgetful? No. Impulsive? Only when it came to buying art. The petition painted him as a doddering old man clinging to control. It painted my parents as the responsible middle generation just trying to protect their child. The judge had partially granted their request. He'd added them as co-trustees with limited powers. Grandpa remained a trustee, but needed their concurrence for most distributions. Ms. Patel had been sidelined to a monitoring role. And then, Monica said, tapping the next binder, they started getting creative. The distribution logs showed payments to Hart Family Education and Expenses, LLC, Hart Home Improvement Fund, Hart Kensington Joint Ventures, loans, always labeled as loans, very few repayments. They'd used my trust as collateral on a second mortgage. They'd paid off Dad's gambling debt, euphemistically called a business line of credit payoff. They'd taken trips, conferences. The notes said, I fought them on as much as I could. Ms. Patel said, quietly, but once they had co-trustee status, the court gave them broad discretion. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, throat thick. I was ordered not to communicate directly with you about trust details until you turned 18, she said. When I tried to push back, they threatened my position. I tried to leave hints where I could. The portal, the notes, but your parents controlled access to you. I believed her. Anger wasn't as simple as picking a single target. It had layers. My parents, the judge, the system that presumed parents know best, even when money distorted every decision. What can we do now? Grandpa asked Monica. She leaned back. Legally, she said, we can petition to remove your parents as trustees for breach of fiduciary duty. They've clearly used trust assets for their own benefit without Ava's consent. We can seek an accounting and surcharges, basically asking the court to force them to repay what they took. We can also pursue civil claims for fraud if we can show they misrepresented your capacity to the court and to Ms. Patel. Will we get the $3 million back? I asked. Probably not all, she said. Some of it is gone. Spent. You can't claw back casino chips and hotel bills, but you can recoup big chunks. Equity in the house, remaining investment accounts, maybe even certain retirement contributions if they can be traced to trust misuse. Grandpa frowned. I don't care about punishing them, he said. I care about making Ava whole. Monica shook her head. They punished themselves, she said, by choosing short-term comfort over long-term security. What we're doing is rebalancing. She turned to me. The bigger question is, she said, how far you want to go. You're an adult. You can tell us to let it go, or you can take the stand in a courtroom and describe exactly what happened. Either way, there will be fallout. I thought of Mom's voicemail, the last one she'd left before I stopped listening. You embarrassed us, she'd said, running off to your grandfather, making us look like villains. We did everything for you. Everything. I thought of Dad's, colder. If you go through with this, you're not our daughter anymore. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. If I don't go through with this, I said softly, then I'm not my grandfather's granddaughter anymore. Not the one he raised me to be. Grandpa's hand tightened on my arm. Monica nodded. Then we file, she said. 5. Court and consequences. Courtrooms aren't like the movies. They're quieter. More paperwork, less shouting. Our first hearing was for emergency removal of my parents as trustees. The judge this time was not the same one who'd handed them the keys years earlier. Judge Ramirez was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for liking facts more than stories, as Monica put it. My parents sat at the respondents' table, immaculate as always. Mom in a cream blouse and pearl earrings. Dad in a navy suit, hair slicked back. They looked like the picture of respectable middle-class parents. I sat at the petitioner's table with Monica, wearing a simple dress and cardigan, hair pulled back. Grandpa sat behind us. In the first row, a quiet, steady presence. Ms. Patel sat near the wall, notes in hand. The judge listened as Monica outlined the basic story. Large trust created for Ava. Court-ordered addition of parents as co-trustees, substantial distributions for questionable family expenses. Ava left with less than 2% of the original value. She showed the ledgers, the transfers, the LLCs, the absence of Ava's consent for any of them. My parents' lawyer argued what I'd expected, that the expenditures benefited the family unit, that my living in the house, eating the food, and attending the schools paid for with trust funds meant I had already enjoyed the benefit. that the market downer had done much of the damage. Judge Ramirez asked one question that cut through their narrative. "At any point," she said, peering over her glasses, "did you present these plans to your daughter and ask for her approval once she turned 18? Mom shifted. She was vulnerable, she said, easily manipulated by her grandfather. We didn't want to burden her with adult worries." "So that's a no," the judge said dryly. Dad jumped in. "We had to act quickly," he said. "We were underwater on the mortgage. The trust saved us from foreclosure, which would have left Ava homeless." I bit back a bitter laugh. "And yet," Monica said, "she is currently in a transitional living program funded by Mr. Kensington, because after being told she was cut off, she had no stable housing. It seems the only person the trust failed to house long-term was its beneficiary." A ripple went through the small courtroom. The judge raised a hand. "Enough," she said. "I have seen enough to know that, at minimum, there are serious questions about whether the co-trustees have complied with their fiduciary duties." She looked at my parents. "Given the apparent self-dealing and lack of transparency, I am suspending your authority as trustees effective immediately," she said. "Ms. Patel will be reinstated as sole trustee. A full forensic accounting will be ordered. We will reconvene once those results are in." Mom let out a choked sound. Dad stiffened. "This is outrageous," he said. "We are her parents. We have always had her best interests at heart." "The law cares less about your intentions than your actions," Judge Ramirez replied. "You may have an opportunity to explain further when we examine the accounting. For now, my duty is to protect the remaining trust assets from further erosion." Her gavel came down. It was not the end. We still had months of audits, depositions, and more hearings ahead. But it was the first time someone with power had said to my parents, "Enough." 6. Quiet revenge. People hear revenge and think of dramatic speeches, of public shaming. My revenge, if you can call it that, was quieter. It was in every spreadsheet Ms. Patel and the forensic accountants compiled, showing exactly how many spa trips, mortgage payments, and conference weekends had been billed to my future. It was in my mom's face when the judge asked her to explain a transfer labeled pool renovation from the education subaccount. We needed to maintain the house's value. Mom had said weakly, "It appears you also needed a hot tub." The judge replied. It was in the final order the court issued 8 months later, removing my parents permanently as trustees, holding them personally liable for nearly $1 million in improper distributions, placing a lien on their home to secure repayment, directing the recovered funds and any restitution from selling their suburban lifestyle back into my trust. They wouldn't go to prison. This was civil, not criminal, but they would not be comfortably retired on money meant for my education. They would not be able to pretend it had all been bad luck. Some people said I was cruel. Family friends called, whispered, "Couldn't you have handled this privately? They're your parents." Privately had gotten me homeless. Publicly got me some of my life back. When the dust settled, my trust balance wasn't $3 million. It would never be again. But with the assets clawed back, equity from selling their house, liquidating their investments purchased with my funds, and a settlement Grandpa negotiated from a bank that had looked the other way, I ended up with enough to finish my degree without loans, pay for a small, safe apartment, start a modest emergency fund. More importantly, the trust was back under control of someone who actually saw me. Not as leverage, as a person. My father sent one last letter. It was 3 pages of justifications and half apologies. He wrote, "We never meant to hurt you. We just thought the money was for all of us, for the family. Your grandfather always threw it around. We thought we were doing what he would have wanted." I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote my own letter. To myself. I kept it in the front of the new trust binder. "Dear Ava, I wrote, "Your parents' choices are not a measure of your worth or your competence. You did not fail because they misused money. You succeeded because you refused to let that be the end of your story." Grandpa read it, nodded, and said, "You've got more sense than I did at your age." I smiled. "Maybe we're both learning." I said, 7. Building my own life. Leaving charity camp wasn't as cinematic as being rescued by a billionaire. Yes, Grandpa insisted on paying for therapy, rent, and school. But he also insisted on something else. "That trust is yours," he said. "I'll help. But you decide how to use it. Use it wisely. Use it stupidly, sometimes. Just don't let anyone, not even me, tell you your only role is to be grateful and dependent." I transferred back to university part-time. I worked at the campus legal aid clinic, helping other students unravel their own knots, student loan fine print, negligent landlords, families trying to seize Pell refund checks. Sometimes old anger flared when I heard stories that sounded too much like mine. But more often, I felt useful. Grandpa and I saw each other more. Not as often as magazine versions of this story would suggest. He was still busy. So was I. But the distance between our worlds shrank. At one family foundation board meeting, a member suggested expanding our youth homelessness program. Grandpa looked at me. "Why don't you present this one?" he asked. So I did. I talked about how homelessness isn't always someone sleeping on a bench. Sometimes it's a kid on a friend's couch because their family refuses to accept who they are or what they refuse to tolerate. Sometimes it's someone with a trust fund in their name and nothing in their pocket. We can't fix every broken family, I said, but we can stop assuming that parents always have their kids' best financial interests at heart just because they share DNA. The room was quiet. Then they voted. Funding approved. Later, Grandpa squeezed my shoulder. "I created a trust to help one girl," he said. "You're turning that pain into something that might help a lot more." I shrugged, embarrassed. "Revenge looks better as policy," I joked. He laughed. "Spoken like someone who might actually be ready to take my chair one day," he said. I froze. "You mean?" I began. He smiled. "Not yet," he said. "But when the time comes, I'd rather leave things in the hands of someone who knows what it feels like to be on the wrong end of all this than in the hands of people who only see trusts as ATMs. 8. What I learned when the trust was gone. $3 million is an abstract number unless you live in its shadow. When I was little, it felt like a fairy tale treasure. Untouchable. When I was 18 and saw $1.47, 832.11, it felt like a cruel joke. Not because that amount is nothing. Many people never see that much in their lives, but because of what it represented. Not opportunity, breach. Now, older, I see it differently again. Money is a tool. It amplifies whatever is already there. In my parents, it amplified fear and greed, and the belief that everything should funnel toward them because they'd sacrificed so much. In my grandfather, it amplified good intentions and blind spots and a tendency to believe that writing a check was the same as solving a problem. In me, it's starting to amplify boundaries, the ability to say, yes, I will pay for this thing I value, and no, I will not fund your refusal to change. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been told that you're selfish for wanting control over what was legally and morally supposed to be yours, I hope my story gives you a different script. You can love people and still hold them accountable. You can be grateful for support you did receive and still demand restitution for what was stolen. You can accept help from someone like my grandfather without surrendering your autonomy. The day my billionaire grandpa found me homeless at charity camp was not my lowest point. I'd already lived that, alone in a bathroom stall reading bank statements that felt like obituaries. That day was my turning point. He saw me, Not as the girl in the red coat from magazine covers. Not as the girl my parents painted as ungrateful or unstable. As his granddaughter. As a person the system had failed. And instead of just writing a bigger donation check and walking away, he sat in an ugly office chair and said, "Let's fix this. Together." In the end, the revenge wasn't just on my parents. It was on every story that said I should shut up, be thankful for what I got, and never question the hands that raised me. Because sometimes the hands that raised you also reached into your pockets when you weren't looking. You're allowed to ask them to put it back. Or if they won't, to walk away and build something that is finally fully yours,